Reading from a book, A History of Billington, by Abraham, published in 1878. The township is traversed by three main roads running parallel with each other at a distance of a quarter of a mile or so apart, forming part of the communication between Blackburn and the south of Lancashire, and Clitheroe and parts of Craven beyond. Each of these roads marks its era in English road construction. The oldest of them, called the Old End, pursues the highest ground that could be gained by the makers. Following the summit of the moors from the neighbourhood of Little Harwood until it reaches the Nab, when it bends to the north and descends precipitously to Calder Bridge at the foot of the hill. Some parts of this primitive road are so abrupt in the brows that it could hardly have been practicable for wheeled vehicles, and old inhabitants connect with it only the tradition of the processions of unkempt mountain ponies, line gals as they are called, upon whose backs were conveyed the bulk of the merchandise between Clitheroe and Blackburn at the beginning of the present century, and doubtless for many generations before then. Pennant, proceeding from Blackburn to Walmsley in 1778, just a century ago, traversed this whole road, and says of it, "In the middle of a plain varied with groves and hedgerows, watered by the Ribble, the Hodder and the Calder, I descended a paved road of uncommon steepness and depth, and after crossing the western Calder, a fine stream that rushes out of a narrow valley from the right, I entered the precincts of the Abbey of Walmsley. A portion of this old road at Walmsley, at the Walmsley end, is still in its original state, a very narrow track paved with rough pebbles, shadows and shut in with trees and copses. It is the path by which the ascent of the Nab from Walmsley is usually made. The second road from Blackburn, of comparatively recent construction, keeps the summit level as far as Snodsworth Cross, and thence descends the hill flank gradually until it debouches at the base of the Nab near the bridge. This road is much easier than the oldest road, but is still trying to horses and at some points. The third road and present turnpike through Billington follows a lower route than the second, and has in fact a very easy gradient throughout, as may be judged from the fact that the railroad from Blackburn to Walmsley runs closely parallel the whole distance, and is only tunnelled a quarter of a mile at the highest point of the ascent. The Abbey and village of Walmsley are separated from Billington by the waters of the Calder. The two banks are connected by a bridge over the river just above the Abbey, while a little below the railroad crosses upon a long and lofty viaduct. With Walmsley Monastery, from its foundation to its dissolution, the history of Billington Township is closely associated, for by a succession of gifts presently to be recited, the abbot and monks became possessors both of the whole manor and of the sundry freehold tenements in Billington. The only interesting examples of ancient architecture in Billington are the Episcopal Chapel of St Leonard on Lango Green and the mansion of Hacking Hall at the northeast corner of the township. Several early seats of the lesser gentry have become decayed and been replaced by meaner houses within the century. One or two yeomen's houses of some age yet exist and will be referred to hereafter in association with families once domiciled in them. Until the last few years, this township remained strictly agricultural, but the operations of the cotton manufacturer have at length extended into the River Valley at this point, and there are now 3 small cotton mills at work in Billington, all of them placed near the turnpike road to Blackburn. A few words should perhaps be said concerning the nomenclature of the district I have chosen for illustration. All the existing names of places in Billington may be traced to the Anglo-Saxon or Danish languages, none to an earlier source, Roman or British, unless, as some etymologists have thought, the name Billington itself is partly British in derivation. The term Billinge, now applied only to that part of the hill range that rises to a higher elevation, a little beyond Blackburn, is supposed to have extended to the entire range, and the word Billington seems clearly to be a compound of Billinge and the Saxon word tun, a habitation. It is held by one of our modern philologists that the name Billinge, which is borne by 2 localities in Lancashire and by other elsewhere in England, is not British, but is derived from the designation of one of those early Saxon communities, or marks, by which England was colonised. Mr. Kemble remarks that Billing, the noble progenitor of a royal race in Saxony, has his record in English territorial nomenclature to the present day, for the Billinge, Anglo-Saxon Billingas, have left the traces of their settlements in Billinge, Billingham, Billington and Billinghall, and similar names in Lancashire and half a score or so of English counties. Mr. Harland, following up Campbell's idea, enumerates many supposed settlements of the old Saxon marks in Lancashire, and among them names one of the great antiquity of this township, that of Hacking. Anciently, Hack King, which he surmises to be a seat of the Saxon community of the Isingers. Of some other older names, places within Billington, we have no difficulty in finding the etymology. Bradhill, originally Bradhole, comes obvious from the Brad, that is broad, and Hole, a hill, the Broad Hill, an appellation that accurately describes the extended slope of the low eminence rising behind Bradhill tenement and reaching towards Brock Hole on one hand and towards Langhole on the other. The word Brock Hole, too, is self-apparent in its significance. It is a compound of Brock, a badger, and Hole, a hole, and therefore it means the badger's hole. The name is now generally spelt Brockhall, Brockhall, but this is a corruption. It is correctly Brockhall, the singular noun, of which we have an example of the plural of females further down the Ribble in the name of the township of Brockholes, near Preston. The name of Chew, spelt CHO show, in the older documents given to the lower moiety of Billingtonville, is not so clear in its origin. In some old records, I find the name given Sco being identically in orthography with the Low Dutch shoe word Sco, a shoe, and I can only suggest that the bend of the calder just opposite to the site of the ancient messuage of Show and of the existing Chew Mill does give to the strip of land within it the castle home, the shape of the front part of a shoe. The name of Snodworth, born from the earliest time by that upper corner of the township to the southwest, probably is compounded of snood, that is a hood, and worth, an off farm, or an estate. At Snodworth, a spur of the moorland ridge stands out prominently and roundly against the sky, and might be likened to the outline of a hooded head. As to the derivation of the name Cunliffe, still given the land below Snodworth, which formed the original estate of the Cunliffe family, Gregson has a fanciful account of it, which I hesitate to accept. The earlier spelling is Cunditlive and Condcliffe, perhaps from con, hold, and cliff, descent, or the derivation of this name may have been from the Danish con, or a coney, or rabbit, and cliff, signifying a rabbit hillock. And in accordance with this etymology, the arms of the Cunliffes of Billington are sable. 3 conies, current, argent. But this may only be one of those heraldic puns of which so many examples are found. Such names as Nab, applied to the abrupt front face of the termination of the hilly range in this township, of Bushburn, anciently Buskyburn, given to the rivulet that flows through the centre of Billington into the Calder, and of Langho, given to the place at which the How, or inferior hill, rises that stretches forward to Bradhill and Brockholt, and all too apparent in their meaning to call for discussion. The families settled here at the earliest date to which documentary history can carry us back all derived their surnames from the territorial designations, as in the case with the great majority of our oldest Lancashire surnames. They were the Billingtons, named from the township itself, with several free tenants named from their tenements: Hack King of Hack King, Bradhill of Bradhill, or Bradhole, Cunliffe of Cunliffe, or Cunclive, Show, the modern Chew, of Show, and Snodworth of Snodworth, and Dean of Dean Bill, etc. The archaeology of Billington may be briefly summarised. It has no vestige of the British occupation. The Romans have left here some faint token of their presence. The Roman road, assumed by some to be the mythical 7th Aesir of Richard of Cirencester, crosses Billington for a space of perhaps a mile and a half, a short distance from the south bank of the Ribble, entering the township across Dinkley Brook, about midway between Langho Church and Bradhill, and proceeding in a direct line behind Brockhall to Hacking, where it runs in the rear of the hall and crossed the Calder below the modern crossing place at Potter's Ford. I have noticed what I take to be a section of the Agger in a very evident ridge crossing the field immediately to the south of Crow Wood, exactly on the line of the road as marked by the ordnance surveyors, where I feel confident the Roman pavement will be disclosed on the removal of the sod and subsoil. A Mr. Just identified the road near Hacking Hole, also more to the east than the spot I now indicate. But the traces are not obvious. He writes, near to Hacking's farm, the line makes an angle to the left and shows itself in a high mound under the left-hand fence of the present road to the farm. Baines mentions that in the year 1831 a coin of Hadrian was found in Billington, which bore on its obverse the inscription Hadrianus August cost 3 p, and on the reverse a figure standing before an altar, and the legend Pietas Aug. This coin and the remains of the auger or exos, so far as I know, the discovered Roman antiquities of Billington. During the Saxon period, Billington was the source of one very significant event. A battle, signalised as the momentous in the Anglo-Saxon chronology, was fought upon this ground, AD798. No doubt whatever seems to surround the identification of the battlefield, two early English chroniclers named the locality with concurrent precision. In the year above mentioned, Eardulf, King of Northumbrians, was compelled to take the field against the leaders of a formidable revolt in the western parts of Northumbria. The chiefs of the conspiracy were Wada, and with him Alaric, prime instigators of a former rebellion that had ended in deposition and murder of the previous king. Eardulf encountered the insurgent army on the extreme verge of his kingdom, for it seems certain that the country south of Ribble was then a part of the Saxon kingdom of Northumbria. It was not a part of the Saxon kingdom of Northumbria, but that of Mercia. Wada and his army had probably been driven upon neutral territory before the decisive battle could be forced upon him. At all events, it was here that the rebellion of Wada was crushed. The record of the battle in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, reduced to modern English, is this: AD 798. This year there was a great fight at Wallig, in the land of Northumbrians, during Lent on the 4th before the nones of April. And there Alaric, the son of Herbert, was slain, and many with him. Another chronicler, Simeon of Durham, not only mentions Whalley as near the place of conflict, but more closely particularises the spot. His account in the Latin of the original is as follows, and the English version: a confederacy was made by the murderers of King Ethelred. Wada, chief in that conspiracy, with his force went against King Eardulf, in places called by the English Bilangaho, near Wallagi, and on either side many were slain. Wada, the chief with his men, was put to flight, and King Eardulf regularly achieved victory over the enemies. The name Bilangaho, here assigned to the place of combat, may be taken to refer not to the lofty hills on the south side of the township, which neither army was likely to ascend to preparatory to the battle, but that to the line of knolls or hillocks near the Ribble bank between Hacking, Brockhole and Bradhill. The present name of Lango, given the inner side of this elevated ground, apparently is contraction of the Anglo-Saxon Bilangaho, the small hill by Billinge, the latter term being given to the superior heights of the south. I am here adopting a remark of Whitaker, the historian of Walmsley, endeavoured to elucidate the position of the battle, the written record of which he found confirmed by a local popular tradition as an ancient battle on the lower ground of Billington. On the right bank of the Ribble, just opposite Hacking Hall, are two large tubular mounds, rising from the diluvial lee on the inner side of the bend of the river at this point. These mounds at once proclaim themselves to be artificial in structure and probably monumental in intent. The tumulus nearest to the river is an especially prominent object and bears the name of Low. Into this mound Whitaker had some excavations made about the year 1815, but found the work heavy and gave it up without reaching the centre of the tumulus, where the relics of sepulchre might be expected to be found. I believe these tumuli have not yet been rifled of their secrets, and would suggest that if leave could be had from the owner of the land, the excavation might at some time be made under the direction of your society. Some years after the death of Whitaker, a discovery apparently connected with the Battle of Billington was made on the Billington side of the Ribble. In the flat ground called Brockhall Easies, and very near the river. Canon Rains has a short note of this disclosure in his edition of the Notia Sirestius, which I copy. In the year 1836, as Thomas Hubbersty, the farmer at Brockhall, was removing a large mound of earth in Brockhall's Easies, about 500 yards, that would be 200 yards or so, from the bank of the Ribble, on the left of the road leading from the house, he discovered a kista vein formed of rude stones containing some large human bones and the rusty remains of some spears of iron. The whole crumbled to dust on exposure to air. The battle in which the fate of a kingdom was decided, and in which a king was in command on one side, was no insignificant conflict. The combatants would probably number some thousands, and the battlefield might well extend not only to Hacking, less than a mile above Brockhall Easies, but over the whole plain of Lower Billington on the west side of the Calder. May indeed have begun on the Waley side of that river, have attained its deadliest fierceness about Hacking, just over the ford of the Calder, and has closed on the slope between Brockhall and Bradhill, where the fugitives of Wadda's broken army would be driven in hurried flight to the ford of the Ribble, by crossing which they alone could hope to save their lives from the spears and axes of Erdo's victorious warriors. 1,000 years have passed since the death struggle of the Northumbrian factions on this ground, the memorials of which inscribes the name of Billington and of Waley for the first time upon the pages of written English history. During the long interval, the annals of Billington are marked by few significant transactions. Once, albeit in more modern times, the lower part of the township has been, if not the site of a battle, the scene of a brisk pursuit ensuing upon a considerable fight in the contiguous township of Waley. This was during the Civil War between Charles I and Parliament. The Earl of Derby, who had advanced through Waley for the subjugation of Blackburn 100 to the King's authority, suffered a reverse there at the hands of the Roundheads under Colonel Shuttleworth, through a foolish panic that seized his men. The Royalists retreated across the Calder at Tewmill Ford and Potter Ford, and passed through Billington by the road from Tewmill to Lango Church, and thence over Dinkley Brook to Dinkley and Salisbury, making for Preston. The Roundheads pursued them actively down the valley as far as Ribchester. One Puritan writer relates of this pursuit: We routed their foot which fled over the water, the Calder, their horses still facing us. Our men still pursued them to Lango Green, where Captain Ashton and myself, with much ado, caused our first men to stay till more came up. Then our men shot. Their horse fled, then all our horse came up and pursued them through Salisbury Park and to Rochester, and most of their great ones had some touch or some narrow escape, as themselves report. This engagement was fought on the 20th of April 1643. A portion of the Prince Rupert's army traversed the township during the same war, en route to York and Marston Moor in June 1644. After the events of 798, little is heard of Billington until the establishment of Walmsley Abbey, when its lands and families became an ever-increasing part of the Abbey's life and functions. The first families mentioned are the de Billingtons, whose name is coincident with the name of the district, and is derived no doubt from it. This family would live in a cleared portion of the land and lay claim to it and ownership before the Norman invasion. After their settlement, the de Lacys of Clitheroe, the superior lords of the region, embraced in that honour. They granted away the inferior fee of Billington, and it is said to Hugh, the son of Leofwine, a Saxon landowner in the vicinity. And this was about the time of the reign of Stephen. But William, son of the successor of this Hugh, very soon conveyed his rights in Billington to one Ralph, a son of Geoffrey de Billington. The father of Geoffrey, as his surname implies, was previously domiciled in Billington, but the grant was made to his son Ralph de Billington, and he became the legalised lord of the Ville under the new feudal tenure. From this de Billington, the manorial rights then passed to Sir Adam de Huddlestone, and eventually to the abbot and monks of Walmsley Abbey, who held half a knight's fee of the Duke of Lancaster, which Adam de Billington once held. Besides the manorial estates of the parish, many parcels of land were given to the abbots of Walmsley by successive benefactors. Countess Margaret de Lacy gave them land in Billington on which to have the site for a barn to store corn. William de Dinkley gave half an acre as right of pasturage on Billington Common, which containeth about 2 miles and a half, and also to dig turf and quarry stone upon his land in Billington. The Vicar of Blackburn gave them his field called Snodsworth, whilst Richard de Billington granted them 7 acres of land called Longdale, and 4 acres called Bentham and other lands. And this was around 1296. The first portion of the abbey had been completed and was consecrated in 1306, but the extension of the buildings continued for 2 centuries. According to an old charter dated 1308, there was a hermitage in Billington, which was situated near the rocks on the eastern side. From an old manuscript written by Abbot Lindley of Whalley, we learn that at first the people of Billington were untamed and wild, and in the neighbourhood were a multitude of foxes and other harmful beasts. And he also records that Elker Wood, 60 acres, replenished with oak timber and much underwood, which is hazel and elder, whilst the wood called the Neb contained 40 acres of oak and many fairer ash trees. In the Abbey Coucher book, begun by Abbot Lindley in 1347, are to be found all the names of freeholders in Billington, as well as 140 title deeds relating to the township. It was Abbot Topcliffe, a native of Billington, who laid the foundation stone for the Abbey Church in 1330, and possibly later Abbot Nicholas and William Billington came from this district. In 1435, the vicar of Whalley Church was a William Dinkley. It is possible, or more correctly probable, that during the time the monks were lords of Billington, the people there, along with those of Dinkley, heard Mass in Whalley Church. And no details have been found to support the local tradition that there was a chapel of ease in Old Langho. The following note suggests that rather the parishioners resorted to the public chapel without, that is the Whalley Church, without the monastery of Whalley, excuse me, since they had purchased a chalice for it. In those days the Roman road through Old Langho to the Calder near Potterford would be well used. On the 9th of April in 1537, the Earl of Sussex wrote to Nicholas Tempest, charging him in the King's name to restore a chalice belonging to the chapel of Our Lady without the monastery of Whalley, which the parishioners of Billington and Dinkley did buy, and that the abbot thereof had entrusted to his care. The abbot referred to was the last abbot of Whalley, Abbot Paslin, who had been hung, drawn and quartered at Lancaster on March 10th, 1537, and Nicholas Tempest was executed at Tyburn, May 15th, 1537. After the dissolution of the monastery, the abbey estates remained the property of the Crown for some time, but were eventually sold to various purchasers. Billington Manor, with its appurtenances, became the possession of Sir Thomas Holcroft, a knight, and he was presumed founder of the chapel at Old Langho, which was built in 1557. The local tradition that the stones used in its construction were brought from the dismantled abbey has never been confirmed, though it is argued they are very large for so small a building. And according to the Victoria County history, the erection of a chapel at Old Langho about 1557 was probably due to the Catholic revival under the new vicar, James Hargraves, whom Queen Mary appointed over Blackburn district in 1555. Sir Thomas Walmsley, better known as the Judge, was the founder of the family who were Lords of Billington for over 100 years. The line ended in the heiress Catherine Walmsley, who married Robert the 7th Lord Petre about 1712, and thus carrying the estates into the family of Peters, who hold most of the estate today. And there are inns in Billington named Judge Walmsley and Petrie Arms. Judge Walmsley was the eldest son of Thomas Walmsley of Sholey Hall, Clayton Dale, and he became a famous figure during the reign of Queen Elizabeth. He came of a Catholic family, and his wife, Anne, daughter of Robert Shuttleworth of Hacking Hall, was also a Catholic. Her mother being Jane, daughter of Evan Brown of Ribbleton Hall, a relation of the Cottams of the Haydocks of Cottam Hall. But he must have temporised his religion to a considerable extent, otherwise he could have not have been one of Elizabeth's judges. And yet he evinced extraordinary independence for that arbitrary period, since in 1583 he made before the Court of Common Pleas a stout though ineffectual attempt to sustain the validity of papal dispensation issued during the reign of Queen Mary. His vigour gained him respect, and he does not seem to have been seriously molested. During that critical period, James I knighted him in 1603, and he died a Catholic in 1612. And an elaborate monument was erected to his memory in Blackburn Church, but it was destroyed during the Civil War in 1612 to 1642. His son Thomas Walmsley of Duncan House, Lord of Billington, succeeded him. And whether he was a Catholic or not is doubtful, but his son, who was knighted at Alton Tower in 1617, married in the same year Juliana, daughter of Sir Richard Molyneux, Knight of Sefton. And after a period of conformity whilst MP for Clitheroe, he became a recusant in 1632, and succeeding generations were brought up as Catholics. Bartholomew Walmsley of this family became lord of the parish when a minor and at school abroad, and he got himself into a lot of trouble in 1687 when he found that Old Langer Chapel was without a curate, and conceiving that it was built on his manor, it must be an appendage of his manor, and he fitted it out for Mass. And for a brief period Mass was celebrated there. But in 1688 the Vicar of Blackburn put the law into force, and in June of that year a decree in Chancery restored the chapel to the Church of England. Previously, Walmsley ancestors had kept courts in the chapel for many years, and this may account for his claim of ownership. In 1694, he was on one of the Lancashire Catholics of position arrested but acquitted in connection with the sham Jacobite plot of that year. He had 3 sisters who became nuns. Bartholomew was succeeded by Francis Walmsley, his son, and after his death in 1711 his daughter Catherine became heiress, and as already stated, she carried the estates into the Peters family. When by about 1712 she married the 7th Lord Petrie. Dr. Whittaker describes her as a beneficial and amiable woman, and Kirk says her charities were boundless. She died at a great age and was succeeded by her grandson, the 9th Lord Petrie. And a full account of him is beyond the scope of this recording, but it is interesting to add that one of the 9th Lord's sons achieved celebrity on the turf and won the St. Leger in 1827, 1828 and 1829. And the latter died in 1848, and his widow became a sister at Notre Dame, Sister Mary of St. Francis, and she spent her fortune establishing convents of Notre Dame in Belgium and in England. It was Henry W. Petrie in 1790 to 1852 of Duncan House who gave the land and built St. Mary's, Billington in 1836. It is said that when he was abroad he admired Swiss architecture, and on his return wanted St. Mary's to have a similar style. Well, St. Mary's, Billington was the Catholic church which was replaced by the New Catholic Church in Langlo, and the old church was demolished in 1960. So now it is established that in 1836 the Peters family are the lords of the manor of Billington, and they continue to this day to own land in the parish, but during succeeding years they have had to sell portions of their land to pay off family death duties. So up to 1836 Billington was very, very rural, and there was nothing much except farms and cottages around Chew Mill, and later there was the Painted Wood, which sprang up after the new turnpike road was put through in the 18th century, and apart from that there was very little else. But the coming of the railway in 1850 led to the expansion of both Billington and Langlo. About 1845 it was decided that the Bolton-Blackburn Railway should be extended to Clitheroe, and work began almost immediately. The biggest task in the work was the Billington cutting and embankment, and its continuation by the erection of the Billington-Whalley Viaduct. Bricks for the structure were made in Whalley from clay taken from Hard Hill Common, and the brickwork were situated about where Riddings Lane and Linefield Avenue now stand. I think it's some 70 million bricks were produced. Money all the time during the construction was hard to come by, and so much so that it is recorded that the stone from the excavation of Bull's Head Tunnel at Wiltshire was sold to one Thomas Hilton, who had the contract from Mr. Solomon Longworth to build Judge Walmsley Mill at Billington. The railway was terminated at Chatburn, and on the 15th of June 1850 received its certificate of safety. The official opening was the 20th of June 1850, and a special train was dispatched in the morning from Blackburn to Chatburn to convey all the civic dignities of Clitheroe and the Ribble Valley to a luncheon in Blackburn provided by the civil engineers and contractors. After lunch, the whole assembly entrained for an excursion to Chatburn, and members expressed delight at the excellence of the line and the wonderful views and beauty of the Ribble Valley. Returning to Whalley, the party were again entertained in a huge marquee erected in the field next to Whalley Station. Members of the management expressed secret fears of mischief or sabotage on the line whilst the merrymaking was taking place. So plate layers were dispatched to inspect the line from Whalley in each direction, and it was reported that a stonemason's hammer was found on the Clitheroe side of the track, but whether it had been placed there deliberately or left by accident was not established. The train was cheered on its way throughout its journey by curious onlookers, and it is stated that children of Chatburn School were allowed time off to view at the safe distance of a field away from the line the approach of the puffing iron horse. So, with the coming of the railways, it was then possible for the development of the area during the Industrial Revolution and the subsequent building of the cotton mills. The three cotton mills, Judge Walmsley Mill, Abbey Mill and Primrose Mill at Lango. But to establish the link between these two and previous activities in the parish, we have the old Chew Mill. Now Chew Mill has stood in Elker Lane, halfway between the War Memorial and Brock Hall, and it was, in my youth, a bobbin mill, making bobbins and brushes for the cotton trade. And recent research in the mill find that it was established 600 years ago, and it was for a long time in the ownership of a family by the name of Chew, who gave them its name, and in their turn it is thought they took their own name from Le Chaux, which is possibly descriptive of the land in which the mill was built, and that is at the bend in the Calder, just before it reaches its outlet in the Ribble, and it's a piece of land between the Calder and Bushburn Brook, and the mill was built there, fed by a sluice from the river, and the sluice in its turn was returned to Bushburn Brook and thence back to the Calder. And it's recorded that the Chews of Chew Bank, Potterford, Elker Chew House in Billington, and among the primitive settlers and cultivators of this territory of Billington was a family by the name of Chew. In the 13th century, Adam de Billington granted to Henry, son of Hugh Dalshaw, that is the old name of Chew, and Vicia, his wife, a certain portion of land in the villa of Billington, that namely which Henry and Hugh, his father, and their ancestors, held of me and of my father and my ancestors. And this land is defined as lying between the land of Bernard de Dinkedley on one side and the way that is called Mungay on the other side. A sart and not a sart, and a certain portion which is called the house between the land of Richard de Brigg and the Algerines, and a certain part which is called the Shoal between Bushburn and Calder. The eldest son of Avicia and her husband is Richard, who about the year 1240 granted to Beatus, daughter of Adam de Blackburn, the land which he held in a place called Chew, etc. Richard Dalshaw is referred to as dwelling in his house at Showbank a few years later. And a second son of Henry was Thomas Dalshaw, to whom his father granted his plot of land called Halsh in Billington. After these representatives, I am unable to name any of the Jews of Billington for a couple of centuries. Through that most obscure interval in genealogical history between the reigns of the last Plantagenets and the first Tudors. And in the case of the Jews, indeed, as of the generality of small freeholders and copyholders, we get no help from these sources. Richard Chew then held a messuage called Algreve, and land to the extent of 27 acres. Likewise, in conjunction with two other parties, the same person held a fulling mill in the township. And the fulling mill was the mill for the treating of the cloth that was woven by the handloom weavers. John Chew held 3 acres and a half of land under the monastery in Billington. Adam Chew had a more extensive tenancy embracing 32 acres of arable meadow and woodland. By an inscribed stone at Potter Ford dated 1562 with the initials RAC, we know that a Robert Chew and his wife Anne, or Alice, dwelt there at that date. The next Jews encountered are those named in the will of John Bradhill of Whalley, dated May 31st, 1578. That testament contains these bequests. To my servant John Chew, in considerations of his honest and true service done unto me heretofore, £20, and his gelding that he uses most to ride on, with the saddle and the harness belonging to it. And to one John Chow, doubtless the same individual, is given by the testator all my apparel, not bequeathed. To Robert Chow of Potterford near Hackinghall, is bequeathed a sum of 5 shillings. Chow Mill is mentioned in the will. In the Bradhill pedigree appears a John Chew of Parkhead as the husband of Anne, third daughter of the beloved John Bradhill, and who had for her second husband Thomas Southworth of Highfield, a gentleman. The above Robert Chew of Potterford was progenitor of a second Robert Chew of Potterford, a yeoman who was baptised at Whalley Church January 23rd in 1600. and he had a son Richard, baptised December 10, 1619 at Whalley. The latter Richard Chew resided at Potterford and subsequently at Elker, and was the first of the Elker branch of the Chews. His eldest son was named Richard, and he was baptised at Blackburn Church, in the registers of which appears Richard, son of Richard Chew of Elker, yeoman, baptised July 30, 1654. This son succeeded his father in the occupation of Elker, and I take him to be the Richard Chew de Elker, who in 1684 gave 10 shillings towards the endowment of Langer Chapel, and who was buried at Whalley November 8, 1721. The succeeding representative is Richard Chew of Billington, yeoman, who died in 1726, was buried at Whalley 28th of July 1726, and whose property letters of administration were granted November 2nd, 1726. This Richard Chew had married at St Mary's Church, Clitheroe, May 8, 1701, Christiana, daughter of Kendall, by whom he had issue a son and heir, Kendall Chew, who was baptised at Blackburn Church, February 22nd, 1703. Younger sons, John, baptised at Blackburn in December 1705, Richard, baptised at Blackburn Church September 18, 1709, and Thomas, baptised at the same church January 30, 1713, and a daughter, Dorothy, baptised February 5, 1707, and died in London. The mother of this family, Christiana Chew, was a widow from 1726 to 1763, when she died at an advanced age and was buried at Whalley in April 17, 1763. Kendall Chew of Elker, Gent, heir to Richard, had to wife Anne Stones of Reed and Carter Place, Haslingden, the marriage being performed at Blackburn May 18, 1736 by licence, granted by the Reverend John Holmes, curate of Haslingden. The issue were a son, Richard, and daughters Elizabeth, born in 1741, Ellen, born in 1743, Anne, born in 1745, and Betty, born in 1747. Mr. Kendall Chew occurs as a tenant of Bradill's in 1749, and in the same period paid land tax for his freehold lands in Billington. He died in 1764 and was buried at Whalley on July 30th. Concerning his only son Richard Chew of Billington, a gentleman, I lack information. Beyond that, he had in 1773 a pew by faculty in Langor Church, and it is probable that he died without issue, if not unmarried. Of John, brother of Kendall Chew, the record also failed, but I have been supplied by living descendants with the descent from Richard Chew, a younger son of Richard Chew of Elker, and this was Richard Chew of Whalley, a saddler, who by his wife, Elizabeth Parr of Whalley, had a son Thomas. The father died in 1780 and was buried at Whalley, May 7. Thomas Chew, the son of Whalley, afterwards of Haslingden, saddler, born in March 1736, married at Haslingden October 18, 1763, Elizabeth Watson, and had by her the following issue: Kendall, the eldest son, baptised at Whalley, June 29, 1764, Richard, born June 1768, and John of Friar Hill, Haslingden, born 1774. And so it goes on. There's quite a descent of Jews right up to till one of the Jews built an asylum in Billington, which, as I referred to earlier, as the Mittenfold Farm, as we knew as the Maddox. The building was erected in 1702 and was known as the Asylum. The asylum was built by Abram Jew, who was a doctor, and he was surgeon of Billington and was interred in 1768, aged 54. His sons both followed the medical profession. James Jew the younger married a daughter of Major Clayton of Little Arwood Hall, but had, I understand, no issue. Abram, the other son, also adopted the family profession of medicine. Dr. Abram Jew it was who established in Billington the private asylum for insane persons. He had a pew in Lango Church, concerning which the entry appears in the parish books 1770 to Abram Jew, Chirurgian, for leave to erect a new, handsome and convenient pew in a certain vacant space at the northwest end of the chapel. By his wife Jane, this gentleman had a son, Abram, born in 1773, and daughters Anne, married to the Reverend William Barton, incumbent of Lango and Great Harwood; Jane, born in 1765, who married one Hesmond Nelk and resided at the asylum after her father's death. And she died in the 7th of April 1865, aged 90. And Alice, born January 27, 1779, married Mr. Thomas Carr of Blackburn and died a widow at Whalley Abbey on the 9th of January 1859 at the age of 80, and was interred at Old Lango Church. Dr. Abram Jew died in the year 1800, and one of the slabs within the railed enclosure of the Tomb of the Jews at Lango is inscribed Abram Jew, surgeon of Billington, died the 2nd of July 1800, age 52. Also, Jane Jew, his widow, died October 12, 1807, age 67. The son of this pair, Abram Jew, practised as a doctor of medicine in Blackburn, where he established a good practice, and the esteem in which he was held in that town is attested by a handsome memorial tablet with a bust surmounting in white marble placed upon the wall of St. John's Church, Blackburn, which was provided by public subscription shortly after the death of this younger Abram Jew. He died, the marble records, after a short illness on the 2nd of April 1819, in the 46th year of his age, and deeply regretted. Beneath, the following tribute to his character appears: in memory of Abram Jew, Esquire, late of this town, surgeon, a man distinguished by integrity and benevolence of character, by mildness of disposition, affability of manners, and every social quality calculated to ensure general esteem. In the exercise of his profession, his skill, humanity, and assiduity were highly conspicuous. His charity was extensive, and of all measures conductive to the public benefit, he was ever found the zealous, able, and active support. Well, the Thomas Carr mentioned was at one time resident at Chew Mill, because at Old Lango Church on the west wall is a brass plate which records the fact that one Thomas Carr of Chew Mill spent £200 of his own money repairing the fabric of the church. So the coming of the railways was the beginning of the expansion and growth of Billington as we have come to know it today, and I would hope to